You don't belong here. A widow's defiance won the heart of the man she nearly destroyed. Before we begin, welcome back to the channel. And if this is your first time here, you have found the right place. We tell stories about ordinary people who face impossible choices and find extraordinary love in the ruins of the life they thought they knew. This story is set in the New Mexico territory, autumn of 1878. It begins with a tray of bread on the floor, a widow with flour on her hands, and words she will spend years wishing she could take back. But the words were true, and the man she said them to already knew it. If you love slow-burn romance women who refuse to break and men who earn love the hard way, this one is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we release new stories every week and you will not want to miss what comes next. Now, let us begin. The bread hit the floor before Nora Hale could catch it. 12 loaves. She had been up since before 4 in the morning to shape them, listening to the dark outside the window and to the small sounds of her daughter sleeping in the back room. May had cried in the night again, not from nightmares, just from that half-asleep sadness that children carried sometimes without knowing why. And Nora had gone to her and smoothed the hair from her face and sat on the edge of the narrow bed until the crying stopped. That had cost her an hour, maybe more. So when the door of her bakery flew open hard enough to knock the tray from her hands, it was not just bread that scattered across the sawdust floor of Redstone Flats' smallest shop. It was the hour she had not slept. It was the ache in her hands from the kneading. It was 4 years of mornings exactly like this one. 4 years of getting up before dawn and making something from nothing because there was a little girl in the back room who needed to eat. Nora stood with her hands still extended where the tray had been staring at the ruined loaves. Then she looked up. The man in her doorway was tall, broad across the shoulders in a way that filled the frame. Trail dust on his hat, trail dust on his coat, trail dust on the worn leather of his boots, like he had been riding so long the road had simply become part of him. He had a hard face, the kind that comes not from cruelty, but from years of weather and silence. A jawbone like cut stone, eyes the color of creek water in October, that particular shade between gray and green that looked different depending on which direction the light came from. He was looking at the bread on the floor. Then he looked at her. "Ma'am," he started, "get out." The words came out of Nora's mouth like water from a cracked pipe, steady, cold, impossible to stop. Her hands had closed into fists at her sides. She could feel flour on her knuckles. She could feel the tiredness behind her eyes. "Get out of my shop." The man did not move. He looked at the bread again, then back at her, and something moved across his face, not anger. Something quieter, something she was too tired and too raw to read correctly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't see you coming through. Let me pay for—" "I don't want your money." Nora bent down and began gathering the loaves, her movements sharp and deliberate. A ruined loaf was a ruined loaf. There was nothing to be done with bread that had fallen on a sawdust floor except compost it and start again, which meant another hour of work she did not have. "Ma'am, please, I can—" "You can what?" She straightened up so fast she nearly knocked heads with him. He had crouched down to help her, which she had not expected, and the unexpectedness of it made her angrier. "You can fix this. You can give me back the 3 hours I spent on this dough, the night I lost because my daughter had bad dreams and still had to be up before the sun." The stranger took one step back. "Good. Let him retreat." "You men," Nora said, and her voice had risen now enough that she knew the sound would carry out to the street, and she found she did not care. "You come barreling through life like you own everything in it, like doors are things that open themselves, like the work behind them doesn't exist and neither do the people doing it." She set the ruined bread on the counter with a sound like a verdict. "I buried my husband 4 years ago. I have been fighting every single day since then to keep a roof over my daughter's head and food in her stomach and that bakery sign hanging over that door. I don't have time for careless men who can't be bothered to look before they walk." A small group had gathered outside the window. She could see them: Mrs. Ellard from the dry goods store, old Pete Skaggs from the livery, a couple of ranch hands from somewhere up the valley, all of them pretending not to watch while watching with great dedication. Let them. Let the whole town of Redstone Flats watch Nora Hale tell off a stranger on a Tuesday morning. It would give them something to talk about besides the drought. "So take your apologies," she said, and take whatever coin you were about to offer me and go find somewhere else to stand. And the next time you open a door, look through the glass first to see if someone is on the other side." The silence that followed was the particular kind that has weight. The man had not moved during her speech, had not tried to interrupt her, had not raised his voice, had not done what men usually did, talked over her or walked out before she finished, as if the full force of what she said was something to be avoided. He had simply stood there and let every word land, and when she finished, he nodded. Once. Slowly. "Yes, ma'am," he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges the way voices got that had spent more years in the open air than inside four walls. "You're right, I wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry for the bread and I'm sorry for your mourning." He reached up and touched the brim of his hat. An old gesture, the kind men used to make when they meant it. "I hope your day gets better." He pulled the door shut behind him gently this time. Nora stood alone in her shop with flour on her hands and ruined bread on the counter and the sound of her own heart working too hard in her chest. What had she just done? She had screamed at a stranger in front of half the town, had accused him of being thoughtless and arrogant on no evidence beyond a door opened too quickly, had refused his money and his apology, and lectured him about the weight of her life as if he had asked to hear it. And he had stood there and taken all of it without a word of defense. Nora pressed her hands over her face and breathed. It didn't matter. She had work to do, more bread to make a daughter, to feed a Tuesday to survive. She couldn't afford to feel guilty over a stranger's feelings. She got back to work, but she couldn't shake his eyes. The way they had looked at her, not with contempt, not with the wounded pride of a man who had been told off in public, with something that looked uncomfortably close to understanding. She was still thinking about it an hour later when Delamarche pushed through the door with the force of someone who had been walking fast since she heard news. "Lord have mercy, Nora Jane Hale." Della planted herself in the center of the shop and put both hands on her hips. She was a broad, warm woman, Della, the kind of person who took up the right amount of space in a room and made everyone in it feel that the room was better for it. "What in the name of all good sense did you do this morning?" "I told off a man who knocked my bread on the floor." Nora did not look up from her work. "Hand me that scraper." "That man," Della said, grabbing the scraper and handing it over with the air of someone delivering terrible news, "was Emmett Cole." Nora's hands went still on the dough. "The Emmett Cole," Della continued. "Arthur Vance's Emmett Cole, the one Arthur left half the ranch to in his will." The scraper dropped. Nora picked it back up, set it down again, stared at the counter. "No, son." Her voice came out small. "He can't have been. He's been gone for 15 years, I know." Della pulled up the stool behind the counter with the ease of someone who had sat on it several hundred times before. "But he's back. Arthur died last month and the will has been read, and Emmett Cole is now the co-owner of the Vance Ranch and everything that sits on it." She paused. "Including, as it happens, the ground this building stands on." The silence that followed had a different weight than the one before. "My shop," Nora said, not a question, "is on Vance land, has been since before you moved here. You've been paying rent to the estate. And now I'm paying rent to the man I called an arrogant fool in front of Pete Skaggs and two ranch hands. You also told him he didn't look where he was going." Della. "And that men like him barreled through life like they owned everything in it." "Della, please." Which technically, Della gestured toward the door, toward the street, toward the general direction of the Vance Ranch 3 miles east of town. "He now does own a significant portion of everything in it, or around it." Nora sat down on the second stool. Her legs had simply decided they were done holding her up. She thought of the shop, the 2 rooms behind it where she and May slept, the oven she had saved for 2 years to buy secondhand from a bakery going out of business in Las Cruces, the sign above the door Hale's bread painted by Daniel's hand 3 months before he coughed his last cough, the smell of the place in the morning when the first batch came out of the oven, that dense warm sweetness that she had come to think of as the smell of survival. "I have to go see him," she said. Della's eyebrows went up. "You sure that's the direction you want to go? Maybe give it a few days." "Let him. I can't give it a few days. I can't sleep not knowing if I'm about to lose all of this." Nora was already untying her apron. "Can you watch the shop for 2 hours in May when she gets home from school?" "Of course, but Nora." She was already pulling on her bonnet. The Vance Ranch was 3 miles east of Redstone Flats along a road that ran through scrub grass and red rock and a particular kind of New Mexico silence that pressed on the ears. Nora walked it in the full heat of October, which was still warm enough that she arrived at the ranch house with dust on her boots and a dampness at her collar she would have preferred to avoid when making apologies to new landlords. The house itself surprised her. She had passed the property line a dozen times but had never had reason to turn down the long drive. Arthur Vance had been a private man generous with his money in town, stingy with his company, and the ranch house reflected him solid, well-kept, functional rather than decorative. White painted wood, a porch that ran the full width of the front with two rocking chairs that looked like they had been used for many years and intended to be used for many more. Flower boxes under the windows planted with something that had gone dry and leggy in the autumn heat, but had clearly been beautiful once. Someone still lived here who cared about flowers. Nora's courage faltered at the bottom of the porch steps. What exactly was she going to say? "I'm sorry I screamed at you. Please don't take away the only home my daughter has ever known." That seemed both inadequate and embarrassing. But standing here was no better, so she climbed the steps. Before she could knock, the front door opened. The woman who stepped out was small and silver-haired, with a particular posture of someone who had once been much taller and had decided to carry their reduced height as if it were a deliberate choice. She wore a dark dress still in the first months of mourning, but there was nothing diminished about her face. It had the kind of lines that came from a life spent looking directly at hard things. "Mrs. Hale," the woman said. She had a voice like old wood, warm, worn smooth by years of use. "I was wondering if you'd come." "You know who I am?" "My dear, the whole of Redstone Flats knows who you are after this morning." "I'm Edith Vance. Arthur was my husband." She gestured at one of the rocking chairs. "Sit down. You look like you've been walking in the sun and working yourself up into a state the entire way here." "Probably both," Nora admitted and sat. Edith disappeared inside and returned with 2 glasses of water so cold the sides were fogged. Nora drank half of hers in one go and felt something in her chest unclench slightly. "I came to apologize," Nora said, "to Mr. Cole. I didn't know who he was. I was tired and I took it out on a stranger and I said things that—" "Were they true?" Nora stopped. "He came through the door without looking," Edith said, settling into the other chair with the ease of a woman who had been sitting in it for 40 years. "He knocked your bread on the floor. He cost you work you couldn't afford to lose. Were the things you said untrue?" "I called him arrogant." "Did he behave with arrogance?" Nora thought about the way he had stood there, the way he had not raised his voice. "No, not exactly. But I didn't know that yet. Judgment made in anger with incomplete information is not the same as judgment made maliciously." Edith sipped her water. "Emmett has had worse things said to him and deserved more of them. He'll survive your Tuesday." Nora looked at this woman, a widow like herself, in the months after a loss that must have reshaped everything and did not know what to say. She had come expecting cold practicality at best, hostility at worst. She had not expected to be defended. "My shop," she said, because it was the thing she needed to say. "It's on the ranch land, and now it's partly on Emmett's land, yes." Edith's eyes were steady, not unkind. "Are you worried he'll evict you?" The thought had crossed my mind. Emmett Cole has been many things in the course of his life: a drifter, a hired hand, a man who worked other men's land for 20 years because he had no land of his own. He has not been petty or cruel." She paused. "Arthur chose him for a reason. Arthur spent 40 years watching men, really watching them. He saw something in Emmett that most people missed." "What was that?" "A good heart," Edith said, wearing the face of a man who has stopped expecting good things to happen to him. The sound of hoofbeats on the drive made Nora turn. A horse was coming in from the east at a long, easy lope, not hurrying but covering ground efficiently the way horses did when their riders knew how to ask correctly. Even from a distance, she recognized the shape of him, the breadth of shoulder, the easy way he sat, as if the saddle were simply another room he happened to occupy. Emmett Cole rode up to the hitching post, dismounted with one fluid movement, and tied off his horse. Then he turned and saw her on the porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He climbed the porch steps slowly. His hat was in his hand before he reached the top. "Ma'am," he said. "Mr. Cole." Nora stood, Her hands were clasped in front of her because they needed something to do. I came to apologize. What I said this morning was fair, he said. It wasn't. I didn't know who you were. I had no right to, Mr. Wahazlik. His voice was quiet. Not soft, there was nothing soft about this man, but it was careful, the way you spoke around something fragile you did not want to break. I came through your door without looking. I knocked your bread on the floor. You told me the truth of what that cost you. He paused. I've spent 20 years in places where knowing the truth of a situation was the only thing that kept you alive. I'm not inclined to hold it against someone for telling it. Nora looked at him. He was looking back at her with those creek-water eyes and that hard weather-cut face, and she had the unsettling sense of being seen clearly by someone who was used to looking without flinching. My shop, she said. It's on your land now. Half my land. A very slight dip of his chin. The other half is Edith's. Are you going to raise my rent, or, She could not quite bring herself to say the word, but he heard it anyway. No. He said it without hesitation, without calculation. Your rent stays what it was. I don't have any interest in punishing people for keeping up what they've built. He was quiet a moment. I do have a proposition if you're willing to hear it. Her guard went up. She felt it like a flinch. What kind of proposition? Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It might have been the beginning of a smile, or it might have been just the wind. I've got 11 men on this ranch, and I've been feeding them the same salt pork and burned biscuits for 6 weeks. 3 of them have started making comments about the quality of the bread in town. He looked at her steadily. If you'd be willing to supply bread for the ranch, say 3 times a week, I'd be happy to apply it against your rent. Or pay you cash money if you'd prefer. Either way. Nora stared at him. You want to pay me to bake. I want to stop feeding my men biscuits that could double as roof tiles, and you want a steadier income than a town bakery provides in October. The almost smile again. Seems like a problem and a solution that found each other. Edith made a small sound from her chair. That might have been approval. Nora looked at the man in front of her, the trail dust still on him, the hat held at his side with large work-scarred hands, the eyes that were not unkind, despite the hard set of the face around them, and thought about her counter full of bread, her oven, her daughter sleeping in the back room every night, the sign above the door in Daniel's handwriting. I can do that, she said. But Mr. Cole, yes ma'am. I want to be clear about something. She met his eyes. I'm not sorry for being angry this morning. I am sorry for the names I called you before I had information. But I will not apologize for speaking plainly to someone who knocked my work on the floor. A pause. Then the almost smile broke fully, and it transformed his face the way a door opening lets in light. Brief, almost startled, like he had not expected to use those muscles. Yes, ma'am, he said. I reckon you shouldn't. Nora walked back to Redstone Flats with the afternoon sun behind her, throwing her shadow long on the red dirt road. She had gone to the Vance Ranch expecting a confrontation and had come back with a business arrangement. She had gone braced for a man who would use his advantage against her, and had found a man who apparently had no interest in advantages of that kind. She was still trying to work out what to do with that when May came running out of the shop door and wrapped herself around Nora's waist with the force of a small charging animal. Mama Della said you went to the big ranch. Did you see the horses? I did see horses. Nora looked at her daughter, 9 years old, Daniel's eyes, Daniel's dark hair, his gift for finding joy in whatever was directly in front of her. How was school? Mrs. Garrett says my reading is excellent. May drew out the word with great care, as if it were a coin she had just earned. And Tommy Ferris tried to say it wasn't, but Mrs. Garrett said it was, and then Tommy had to sit in the corner. Learning is not a competition, May. I know, May beamed, but I was still better. They went inside. Della was still behind the counter, icing a cake she had been paid to make for the Ellard family's daughter's birthday, and she looked up when they came in. Well, she said, he's not going to evict me. I heard something about bread. We made an arrangement. Nora took off her bonnet. He needs bread for the ranch. I need a reliable income. We'll see how it goes. Della studied her with the particular expression of someone who had known her for 4 years and was choosing for once to say nothing. That night, after May was asleep, Nora sat at the small table in the back room with a candle and the account book she kept for the shop. Numbers. She was good at numbers, Daniel had called it, her talent for making small things stretch, though what she thought of it as was just the arithmetic of necessity. Every loaf had a cost, every month had a margin. There was no room for sentiment in the account book. But she kept thinking about the ranch house porch, about Edith Vance's voice saying a good heart, wearing the face of a man who has stopped expecting good things to happen to him, about the way Emmett Cole had held his hat and stood still while she cataloged his shortcomings in public, and then said yes, ma'am, as if she had told him something he already knew and was grateful to have confirmed. She closed the account book. She had work in the morning. That was the only thing that mattered. The first delivery was on a Wednesday, and Nora had been up since 4. Not because of the ranch order, she had been up since 4 every morning for 4 years, but the order meant she was baking more than usual. Larger batches, better planning. 16 loaves of sourdough and 8 of the dense brown bread she had learned from an old woman in Santa Fe who had said it was the bread that kept you standing when everything else gave out. May woke on her own and appeared in the doorway of the bakery at 6, her hair in one braid instead of 2, because she had only finished one before getting distracted by something wearing her school dress with a smear of jam she had already been responsible for by 6 in the morning. "Mama, when is the horseman coming?" "Mr. Cole is coming at noon to collect the order, and he is not the horseman." "He has a horse." "Many people have horses, May." "His horse is very big." May climbed onto the stool behind the counter, which was her spot, the place she had sat since she was small enough that her legs swung freely in the air. Now her feet almost reached the rail. "I'm going to give it an apple." "You'll ask permission first." Obviously, May said this with great dignity, as if the suggestion she might not have asked was slightly insulting. Noon came, and so did Emmett Cole with a wagon and a young ranch hand named Cal, who tipped his hat at Nora and then went immediately shy and stared at the floor of the bakery with great intensity. Emmett himself stood in the middle of the shop and looked at the lined loaves on the counter with an expression that Nora could not read. He was not smiling. He was not frowning. He was simply looking the way you looked at something that reminded you of something else. "They look good," he said. "They are good." Nora began wrapping the loaves. "Sourdough keeps better in the heat than white bread. It'll last your men through the week if they're not too liberal with it." He helped her pack without being asked, picked up a loaf, checked the weight with his hand, set it in the crate with care. Not clumsy, not the hands of a man who handled things carelessly by nature. "Where's your daughter?" he asked. "Out." Nora looked toward the door and saw May standing beside the wagon with her apple, looking up at Emmett's horse, a bay with a white star, large and calm with open adoration. "I can give him this," May was asking Cal. Cal had apparently come back to himself enough to answer because he was nodding and pointing to the horse's nose. "He won't mind," Cal said. "He's gentle." May held out the apple very carefully, and the horse took it with the kind of dignified thoroughness that horses brought to apples, and May's whole face transformed. Emmett stood in the shop doorway watching this and said nothing for a long moment. "She's like that with everything," Nora said. "Animals, people. She finds what's worth knowing about something and goes straight to it." "Smart kid." He paused. "She looks like she's missing a braid." Nora looked. He was right. May had apparently abandoned the second braid entirely at some point in the morning and seemed unbothered by this. "She gets distracted easily." "Occupied," he corrected, not arguing, just choosing the word more carefully. "Distracted means pulled away from something. She's just occupied by whatever's directly in front of her." Nora looked at him. He was looking at May, not at her. His face had the same hard set as before, but there was something in it she hadn't seen this morning at the ranch. Something quieter. "She asked me earlier what your horse dreams about," Nora said. He turned. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know. I said horses probably dreamed about running." "That's a reasonable answer." He paused. "I think he dreams about grass, personally. He always looks pleased when he wakes up in a good pasture." May, who had apparently finished with the horse and developed the uncanny child ability to suddenly appear in conversations she had not been part of, looked up at him. "Why do you look sad when you look at Mama's shop?" she asked. The question landed in the air between them like a stone dropped in still water. Nora felt her face go to something careful and apologetic, the expression she used when May asked something true that was too direct to be comfortable. "May, No. Emmett crouched down to May's level with the ease of a man who had spent time around children and did not find them alarming. It's a fair question. He looked at the building, the white-painted front, the bakery sign, the small window, with its display of today's loaves. Then he looked back at May. This building has history in it. Not all history is sad, but some of it is. What kind of history? The kind that takes a while to tell. He stood. Maybe another time. May considered this with the seriousness of someone taking a rain check for important information. Then she nodded. Okay. She looked at Nora. Can I have bread? You had bread this morning. That was morning bread. This is now bread. Those are the same bread. They're in different contexts. Nora cut her a slice. Emmett loaded the last of the crates with Cal's help, settled the wagon, and climbed up to the seat. Same time Friday, Mrs. Hale. Same time Friday. He clicked to the horse and the wagon moved. May waved until it turned the corner and was gone. He's nice, May said. He seems that way. Why do people seem things instead of just being things? Nora looked at her daughter. Because it takes time to know things for certain. May thought about this. That makes sense, she said. He still seems nice, though. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Wednesday, Friday, Monday. The ranch order meant Nora baked more but worried less. The mathematics of the arrangement were clean and solid in a way that the irregular income of a town bakery was not. 3 reliable deliveries a week covered the rent with enough left for flour lard, the candles she needed for early morning's May's school supplies. On the second Friday, Emmett arrived slightly early and found Nora wrestling with a batch of dough that had overproofed and was refusing to behave. He looked at the counter, looked at her, and without a word pulled off his coat and rolled up his sleeves. You don't have to, she started. I know. He was already at the counter. Where do you want the extra flour? They worked in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, the specific kind that existed between people who were both simply engaged in the same task and had no particular need to fill the air. Nora found herself noticing things she had not let herself notice before. The way he handled the dough firmly, no hesitation but not roughly. The scar on the back of his left hand, an old one, pale and smooth. The fact that he knew which bowl to reach for without asking which suggested he had been in bakeries before. Your mother taught you, she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Some things. She baked everything. He shaped a loaf with practiced hands. Bread, pies, cakes for people's celebrations when we had enough to make them. She said a kitchen that smelled like bread was a kitchen that was still alive. Nora set a loaf in the pan. What happened to her fever? When I was 15, there was an outbreak. It took most of our town in one winter. He was matter-of-fact about it, the way you were about things that had been fully grieved and set down somewhere, and only occasionally picked back up. She was the last family I had. How did you end up here at the Vance Ranch? Later. He finished the loaf he was shaping and started on the next. After years of later, I worked my way west, doing whatever work there was. Arthur Vance hired me as a hand when I was 23. I worked his ranch for 8 years, saved enough to think about land of my own, and then he stopped. And then I left. The words were complete in themselves. A door closed without explanation. Nora had lived long enough to recognize the shape of a story that was not going to be told right now, and she let it be. What she did not let be because she was who she was the other question. Why did you come back? He did not answer immediately. He shaped another loaf, set it in the pan, brushed the flour from his hands with a methodical gesture that seemed to be buying time. Arthur left me half his ranch, he said at last. That's the official answer. And the unofficial answer. He looked at her then, directly with those creekwater eyes. I haven't decided how much of that I'm ready to share yet. Fair enough. Nora had enough of her own partial answers to know that sometimes honesty meant saying you were not ready, rather than saying something untrue. They finished the batch. He helped her load the ranch order into the wagon. Cal, who had apparently developed a fondness for May's opinions on horses, spent 20 minutes in conversation with her while this was happening. May was explaining which horses she thought were the most intelligent based on their eyes. When the wagon was loaded and Emmett climbed up, Nora said almost without deciding to say it, My husband built this shop. His name was Daniel. He died in the 4th year after we arrived here, lung fever, the doctor said. He left me with May and an oven and that sign. She looked up at the sign. Hale's Bread. The letters slightly uneven because Daniel had been better at carpentry than painting. The sign still has his handwriting on it. I've never been able to bring myself to repaint it. She did not know why she had said it. It was not an exchange she had planned, but it felt correct somehow, like a response to his partial answer. A partial answer of her own. Emmett looked at the sign for a long moment. It's good handwriting, he said. He was a careful man. He did everything carefully. She paused. I miss that about him. The carefulness. Emmett nodded once, the way he nodded when something had landed in him and he was sitting with it. Same time Monday, Mrs. Hale. Same time Monday. He drove away into the afternoon and Nora stood with May beside her in the sign above her head and thought about partial answers and careful men and the way some things took a long time to understand. It was 3 weeks after the first delivery that May came home from school and said quite calmly, Mama, did you know that Mr. Cole used to live in Redstone Flats a long time ago, before we came? Nora set down the bread knife. Where did you hear that? Tommy Ferris said his daddy said Mr. Cole left town because of something bad that happened. May settled on her stool. What happened? I don't know, May. You could ask him. That's not always how it works. Why not, if you want to know something, the most efficient approach is to ask the person who knows. Nora looked at her daughter and thought that 9 years old and already more practical than most adults she knew was both a blessing and occasionally inconvenient. People have things they're not ready to talk about yet, Nora said. Tommy Ferris, Nora said with more firmness than she usually used, is 9 years old and repeating things he overheard, which is not the same as knowing them. May accepted this with the philosophical air she brought to most information she disagreed with. Then, he has kind eyes. Mr. Cole, the horse eyes, but also Mr. Cole. Nora went back to the bread. Outside, the autumn afternoon was turning the light to copper, and the whole of Redstone Flats was going about its ordinary business. And somewhere 3 miles east of them, Emmett Cole was doing whatever men did on their ranches in the evenings, carrying whatever it was he had come back to this town to face. She found herself against all good sense wanting to know what it was. That was when she noticed the other set of eyes on her shop, not from inside it, but from across the street. A woman in pale blue silk standing very still on the far boardwalk, looking at Nora's window with an expression she was too far away to read properly. Blonde, carefully dressed with the kind of stillness that was not calm but contained. Nora had seen her before in the way you saw people in a small town without ever having spoken to them. Celeste Hargrove, she thought, Warren Hargrove's daughter. The Hargroves owned the bank, which meant they owned a significant portion of the town in the way bankers in small territories tended to accumulate portions of things. Celeste was looking at the bakery the way you looked at something you were deciding about. Nora met her eyes. Celeste turned away first. Inside, May was explaining to Della the proper way to pet a horse so that it trusted you. Nora went back to work, but the feeling of those watching eyes stayed with her longer than it should have. The following Monday, something happened that Nora had not anticipated. Emmett arrived for the regular pickup. Usual time, usual wagon, Cal in the seat. But when Nora carried the first crate to the door, Emmett was not at the wagon. He was standing at the far end of the front porch, looking at the side of the building, at the narrow window that opened onto the back room, the room where Nora and May slept, where the cot was, and the small bookshelf and the braided rug May had picked out herself from a trader's cart when she was 6. He was standing perfectly still. His hat was off, held in both hands. His face was turned slightly away from her. Nora set the crate down. She did not call out to him. She had some instinct, some reading of the quality of his stillness that told her this was not a moment for her voice. She stood in the doorway and watched him stand there, and in the long silence of the autumn morning, she became aware of something she had not known before, something in the set of his shoulders and the way he held his hat, like a man in church in the particular angle of his face. He had been here before, not in the way she had been here, not as a tenant, not as a customer. In the way you had been somewhere that was not yours but mattered to you nonetheless. In the way you returned to a place that held a piece of your grief. After a long moment, he turned and saw her watching. He did not look embarrassed. He looked instead like a man who had been caught telling the truth and had decided not to try to cover it. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't mean to take your time. You're not. Nora stayed in the doorway. Do you want to tell me what you were looking at? He was quiet. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of the bakery and the dry autumn grass, and the distant, particular scent of rain that was still days away. My mother lived in this building, he said at last. Before I left, before she died. He looked back at the side window, then away. The room there was hers. She used to leave that window cracked at night so she could hear the street. Nora felt something move through her, something careful and slow, the way understanding moved when it was large enough to change the shape of things. That's May's room, she said. That's where May sleeps. I know, he looked at her then. Arthur Vance gave her that room after I left, when he took on a new tenant at the bakery before yours. He told me in a letter. I think he thought it would comfort me to know the room was being used, being lived in. A pause. He was usually right about things like that. Nora thought about 4 years of mornings in that room, May's drawings on the wall, the smudge of a handprint on the window frame that she had never fully cleaned because it was from when May was very small and she did not want to erase it. Daniel's memory in the walls of the bakery proper, and now this, an older grief, a stranger's grief, layered underneath it all. Is that why you came back? She asked. Why just the inheritance? Partly. He settled his hat back on. Arthur's letter years ago said she had died quickly, that it hadn't hurt long, but I never. He stopped. I never got to say goodbye to the place, to the room I just left, and then she was gone, and the leaving and the loss all happened in the wrong order. The wrong order. Nora knew something about grief that arrived in the wrong order. Daniel had died too fast for her to prepare. She had been angry about that for 2 years, the indecency of how fast it had happened, how she had been denied even the time to say the things you were supposed to say. She would have liked May, Nora said. She did not know why she said it. It seemed true. He looked at her steadily. I think so too. They stood for a moment in the particular quiet of two people who have understood something about each other that they were not ready to name. Then Cal called from the wagon that the crate was loaded, and the moment closed around itself the way moments did, absorb back into the ordinary. Emmett took the last crate himself. At the wagon he paused. Mrs. Hale, the arrangement is working well. If you ever needed to expand the shop, take on more space, I'd like you to have first say in any decisions about the building. Nora looked at him. Why? Because it's your building. He climbed up to the wagon seat. Whatever my name is on the deed. He drove away. Nora stood in the cool morning air for a long time after thinking about the wrong order of things, and the room at the back of her bakery, and a man who had come 15 years and 3 miles to stand outside a window and say goodbye to something he had loved. She went inside. She started the next batch. But she left the window cracked that night, the side window, May's window, the way it had apparently always been left by people who had lived in this building before she had known it existed. Some things she thought deserved to be continued. October settled over Redstone Flats the way it always did, slowly, reluctantly, like a man who had somewhere else he would rather be. The heat broke in the second week and left behind a cool that smelled of dry grass and juniper, and the particular clarity of air that came after a long summer's worth of dust had finally been laid down. Nora baked more in October. People ate more bread when the nights grew cool. It was a reliable thing about people cold, made them want warmth in their hands and in their stomachs, and bread was one of the oldest answers to both. She had learned this from her own mother, who had learned it from hers, which was the way most useful knowledge about bread moved not from books, but from hands to hands across the generations. She was thinking about this one morning while shaping a batch of sourdough when the bell above her door chimed and Celeste Hargrove walked in. Nora had been expecting this, not today specifically. But soon and in this form, Celeste Hargrove in good clothes on a deliberate errand with the particular expression of someone who had decided to assess a situation directly. Celeste was perhaps 25, blonde as Nora had noticed from across the street, with a face that was genuinely pretty, in the composed way of a woman who had been told she was pretty since childhood and had taken it as factual information, rather than something requiring active cultivation. She wore a jacket the color of sage with brass buttons. She was carrying herself as though the shop were smaller than its actual dimensions. Mrs. Hale, her voice was pleasant. I don't think we have been formally introduced. I'm Celeste Hargrove. My father is Warren Hargrove. I know who your father is. Nora wiped her hands on her apron. What can I do for you, Miss Hargrove? I'd like a loaf of that sourdough. I've heard it's the best in the territory. The smile was precise and practiced. And I wanted to see your shop. I understand you've been doing some business with Emmett Cole. Nora kept her face neutral. I supply bread for the Vance Ranch 3 times a week. How useful for you? Celeste looked around the shop with the unhurried attention of someone cataloging an inventory. Her eyes moved across the counter, the oven, the sign above the door, and then back to Nora. Emmett is settling in well, I think. He's had dinner with us twice this month. Daddy values men who understand land management. He says there aren't many. Your father would know. He would. Celeste's gaze was direct. He's been managing Hargrove Bank for 30 years. He knows this territory as well as any man alive. She paused in a way that was not accidental. He was very close to Arthur Vance, actually. They had a number of financial arrangements between them. Nora wrapped a loaf and set it on the counter. That will be 10 cents. Celeste laid the coin down without looking at it. I hope the arrangement with the ranch is working well for you. It must be a relief to have a steadier income with rent and everything. She picked up the bread. Especially given the difficulties your late husband left behind. Nora's hands went still on the counter. She kept her face even. She had learned in 4 years of being a widow in a small town how to receive unpleasant information in public without letting the person delivering it see it land. It was a skill she had developed the way you develop skills that helped you survive. I'm not sure what you mean, she said. Oh. Celeste's expression shifted not to surprise but to something that had been waiting to be surprised. I assumed you knew about the loan. I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood. She tucked the bread under her arm. The Hargrove Bank keeps very detailed records, of course. It's how Daddy has been so successful. He always knows where the numbers are. She left before Nora could ask the question that was pressing at the back of her throat. The loan. Nora stood behind her counter and thought carefully. Daniel had never mentioned a loan from the Hargrove Bank. They had talked about money often. Daniel had been a careful man. He had kept the accounts. He had told her what they had and what they owed. There had been no mention of Hargrove Bank, no mention of any debt beyond the cost of the second-hand oven, which they had paid down over 2 years. But Daniel had also in his last weeks been very sick. He might have. She did not let the thought finish. She did not let herself worry about this yet. She went back to work and kept her hands moving and told herself she would sort it out when there was something definite to sort. Celeste Hargrove was the kind of woman who said things with the intention of watching you react, and Nora had no interest in giving her that satisfaction. 3 days later, Warren Hargrove walked into her shop. He was a tall man, silver-haired with the kind of face that money had shaped over decades, not cruel exactly, but remote. The face of a man who had made many decisions about other people's situations and had developed the particular quality of detachment that came from never being on the receiving end of those decisions. He wore a suit. He looked at her shop the way men who had never worked in small spaces looked at small spaces with a faint surprise that anyone could manage their lives in so little room. Mrs. Hale, he set a document on her counter. Nora looked at it, a legal document on Hargrove Bank letterhead folded into thirds official in the way that only documents carrying bad news were ever truly official. She did not touch it. Your late husband took out a loan from my bank 4 years ago, Warren said, $240. Signed in his name and as the terms of our arrangement stipulate, transferable to surviving spouse upon the borrower's death. He paused. You have been making partial payments. I appreciate that. But you have missed 3 payments in the past 18 months, and under the terms of the loan that gives me the right to call in the full balance. Nora looked at the document. $240. 4 years of payments. Payments she had been making, but when how she kept accounts. She knew every dollar that came in and went out of this shop. She had never seen a Hargrove Bank payment leave those accounts, unless it had left under a different name. Unless the payments had been taken directly from the rent from the portion that went to the Vance estate, with a quiet arrangement between Arthur Vance and Warren Hargrove that neither had thought to mention to Nora. I don't believe that document is legal, she said. Warren's expression did not change. Mrs. Haley, my husband told me our accounts. She kept her voice level. He was a careful man. If he had taken out a loan, he would have told me. Men often keep their financial worries from their wives. Warren said this with the comfortable authority of someone who had seen it many times. It's not unusual. Daniel was not that kind of man. Nevertheless, he straightened the document with one finger. The balance stands, and the terms allow me to pursue foreclosure on the business assets, including the bakery equipment, the lease, and your right to operate from this building unless the balance is settled within 60 days. Nora breathed. Or, Warren continued, there is an alternative arrangement. She looked at him. Emmett Cole has come into a significant inheritance. He is, as I understand it, spending considerable time at your establishment. It would not be unusual for a man in his position to develop. Warren chose the word with the care of someone choosing a tool for a particular job. Attachments. Given that it seems possible that the right word from you might redirect his attention to more appropriate channels. A pause. My daughter, for instance, has an interest in the Vance Ranch that would benefit everyone in this territory. The silence was very complete. Nora looked at Warren Hargrove, at his remote, careful face, at the document on her counter, at the 4 years of her life represented in the walls around her, and felt something very cold settle in her stomach. This was what the watching eyes across the street had been about. This was what Celeste's pointed comment about loans and records had been about. This had been coming since the day Emmett Cole walked into her bakery for the first time. You want me to push him away, Nora said, so your daughter can... I want you to consider your options carefully. Warren's voice was perfectly even. You have a child. You have a business that is your only livelihood. The sensible choice seems clear. Nora picked up the document. She read it carefully, all of it, every clause, because she was the kind of woman who read every document before she responded to it. The terms were, as he said. The signature was Daniel's. The transfer clause was standard bank language. What was not standard was the date on the transfer clause. It was dated 2 weeks after Daniel's death in a hand that was not Daniel's. She set the document down. Get out of my shop, she said. Not loudly, quietly, the way you said things that were absolutely certain. Warren blinked. Mrs. Hale, get out and take that document with you. Because I am going to spend the next several days looking very carefully at the legality of a transfer clause dated after the death of the man who supposedly signed it. She met his eyes. When I have finished looking at it, you and I are going to have a very different conversation. Warren picked up the document. His face had not changed, but something behind it had the slight recalibration of a man who had expected a simpler outcome. I hope you'll reconsider, he said. The 60-day clock runs regardless of your investigation. He left. Nora waited until his footsteps faded from the boardwalk. Then she sat down on the stool behind the counter and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed until the shaking stopped. She had just refused the most powerful man in Redstone Flats and implied she was going to challenge him legally on the basis of a document she had looked at for 30 seconds. She had no lawyer. She had no legal knowledge beyond what common sense and 4 years of fighting for a business could provide. She had no money for the 60-day balance, even if the document turned out to be valid. What she had was the transfer clause with the wrong date, and she had not told Emmett any of this. She needed to tell him. She knew she needed to tell him, but the thought of it, the thought of walking to that ranch and saying your new land ownership has made you a target, and my shop is being used as leverage, and someone is trying to manipulate both of us through. It felt like walking into a conversation she had no way of controlling. She kept baking instead. It was not the right choice and she knew it, but it was the choice she made. Della noticed within 2 days. You've been quiet, Della said on the third morning, and you've checked the front window 8 times in the past hour. I'm watching for customers, but the customers are not coming from the direction you're watching. Nora did not answer. Della set down her rolling pin with the deliberate sound of a woman who had made a decision. Warren Hargrove came to see you. Nora's hand stilled. His clerk was drinking at the saloon 2 nights ago, Della said, talking about how the boss was going to settle the issue with their baker woman. She paused. How much, Nora? The fight went out of her. $240 plus whatever interest he's decided to add. She said it flat and fast, like pulling a splinter. There's a document. Supposedly Daniel took out the loan before he died to buy the oven, maybe, I don't know. The transfer clause says the debt passes to me. She paused. But the transfer clause is dated 2 weeks after Daniel died. Della was very still. That's a forgery. It might be. I don't know enough law to be certain. Nora looked at her hands. He wants me to push Emmett towards Celeste. That's the real demand. The loan is the leverage. You have to tell Emmett. I know. Then why haven't you? Because. The word sat there for a moment without anything following it. Then because telling him means admitting that my being here has become a problem for him. That I come with complications he didn't ask for. And she stopped. He what? He already lost something in this building, Nora said. His mother. He came back for that, for the chance to be at peace with it. I don't want to make his inheritance into something ugly when it could be something. She stopped again. Something what? Nora looked out the window. Something good, she said quietly. Della was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you care about him. I care about whether his life gets harder because of mine. That's not the same thing. It looks similar from where I'm standing. Nora did not answer. The bell above the door chimed. Emmett Cole walked in. He looked at Nora, then at Della, and something in the quality of the silence told him what it told any man who had spent 20 years reading situations. He looked at Della with a question in his eyes. I'll be in the back, Della said, and disappeared with the tactfulness of someone who had been waiting for an opportunity to do exactly that. Emmett stepped to the counter. What's wrong or nothing? You're lying. He said it without accusation, simply as a statement of observed fact. I've watched enough people try to keep things in to know what it looks like. Emmett, Nora. It was only the second time he had used her name. The first had been at the ranch in the context of Edith trying to explain something. Now it came out differently direct and with a care in it that was more unsettling than the sharpness would have been. Tell me. She told him, all of it. The document and the transfer clause and the wrong date. Celeste and the pointed comment about records. Warren Hargrove walking into her shop and laying the implied ultimatum on her counter. The way he laid it on every counter in Redstone Flats with the calm authority of a man who had never needed to shout, because the weight of his position did the shouting for him. And Emmett listened. He did not interrupt. His face went very still while she talked, not cold, but still the way things went still when they were gathering force. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she could hear the fire in the oven ticking. How much, he said. You are not. How much? $240. She met his eyes. Plus whatever interest he decides to add when you go to pay it, because I know that's what you're thinking. And I am telling you right now, Emmett, that I will not be rescued. Be beholden. She held his gaze. I've been managing my own account since Daniel died. I've made every decision about this shop on my own. I am not going to become someone's responsibility because a banker with a forged document decided to use me as a chess piece. Emmett looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the counter where her hands were pressed flat, flour-dusted and steady. The transfer clause, he said. The wrong date. Yes. You have the document. He took it back when I told him to get out. Something moved in Emmett's face, not quite a smile, but its second cousin. You told Warren Hargrove to get out of your shop. He was in my shop without an invitation making threats. It seemed like the appropriate response. It was. He straightened. I'm not going to pay your debt for you, Nora. I'm going to pay Hargrove to make him stop having leverage over you, and then I'm going to find out what he did with Arthur Vance's accounts. Because if he forged that transfer clause, he was capable of forging other things, and some of them may concern the deed to this property. He paused. That's not about rescuing you. That's about finding out what was done with land I now own. She looked at him. You're splitting a very fine hair, she said. I'm being accurate. There was that not quite smile again. Is there a difference? She thought about it. Maybe not a useful one. Then let me be accurate about one more thing. He was looking at her directly with those creek-water eyes and the hard-cut face that she had spent a month reading and still could not always decode. I'm not doing this because you're my tenant. I'm not doing this because of the ranch or the deed or the accounts. I'm doing it because he stopped, started again. Because what Warren Hargrove is doing is wrong. And because the people being harmed by it are people I don't want harmed. The quiet stretched between them like a thing with shape. I'm going to the bank tomorrow mornings, Emmett said. Do you want me to take Edith? She knew Arthur's finances better than anyone. If Hargrove has been creative with the books, she might see it. Ask her, Nora said. She'll say yes. He nodded. At the door he paused. Nora. Yes. When this is finished, not now, but after, I want to tell you the rest of it. The reason I left 15 years ago. The part I haven't been ready to say. She looked at him. The afternoon light came through the window and lay across the flour-dusted counter and the rows of cooling bread, and he stood in it with his hat in his hand and the shape of everything unsaid still around him. All right, she said. He left. Nora stood for a long time looking at the door he had closed behind him, gently as he always did now, and felt something settle in her chest that was unfamiliar and not entirely comfortable. She was still standing there when May came home from school. Mama, May said, dropping her bag on the counter and reaching for a piece of bread with the automatic confidence of someone who had never been told no. Did something happen? You look like you're thinking very hard about something. I am. Is it about Mr. Cole? Nora looked at her daughter. Why would you ask that? Because that's the face you make when you're thinking about something you don't want to be thinking about. May took a large bite of bread and regarded her mother with 8-year-old clarity. Which is usually Mr. Cole. I make many faces about many things, May. You make the other faces at the accounts and the flour order, May said serenely. This is the other face. Nora looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she picked up her scraper and went back to work. The confrontation at the bank was brief, surgical, and did not go the way Warren Hargrove had intended. Nora heard about it from Edith, who came to the bakery that same afternoon, with the particular brightness of a woman who had spent a long time patient and had finally been given something useful to do. Emmett laid the balance on Warren's desk, Edith said, accepting tea and the best chair with the ease of someone to whom both were regularly offered. Cash money, gold, counted it out coin by coin. She paused for effect. And then I showed Warren the copy of Arthur's ledger that Arthur had given me the year before he died, for safekeeping. She sipped her tea. The loan does exist, it appears, but the transfer clause is, as you suspected, not in Arthur's records and carries a signature date that postdates Daniel's death by 17 days. He forged it. He altered an existing document, which is arguably more sophisticated and certainly more legal. Edith set down her cup. Emmett told him that if the forged clause was not formally withdrawn by the end of the week, the entire matter would be placed before the circuit judge who is due in Redstone Flats in 3 weeks for the autumn assizes. She paused. He also told Warren that he intended to have Arthur's accounts reviewed by a financial examiner from Santa Fe. All of them. Warren agreed, and Warren agreed with the particular speed of a man who knows that the thing he has been doing in the dark looks much worse in the light. Edith looked at Nora with steady gray eyes. He is not a safe enemy. I want you to know that. He agreed today because he had to. He will look for another approach. I know. Good. Edith picked up her cup again. Because the other thing I want you to know is this: Emmett did not do what he did today out of duty to his land or his deed. He did it because it needed to be done for you. She paused. I have known that man since he was 23 years old. I watched him for 8 years before he left, and I have watched him since he came back. He has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you in all the years I have known him. Edith, I'm not telling you what to feel, Edith said. I am telling you what I observe. An old woman's prerogative. She stood. Arthur always said that the best things in his life had come to him sideways, not when he was looking for them, but when he was paying attention to something else entirely. She buttoned her coat. He was usually right about things like that. She left. Nora sat alone in the quiet of her shop with the smell of bread around her and the afternoon light going gold on the counter, and thought about things that came sideways. That evening after May was asleep, Nora took out the account book and wrote down everything that had happened in the past month, the bread deliveries and the income from them. The amount now clear because of a man who had called it business and meant something more. The forged document and its withdrawal. She ran the numbers. Without the threat of the loan, she had margin for the first time in 2 years. Not comfort exactly, but room. The difference between surviving and living, which was a smaller difference than most people thought and a larger one than you could explain to someone who had never had to calculate it. She closed the account book. Then she heard at the side window the one she had started leaving, cracked at night, pushing slightly open in the October wind. The sound of the street outside, the distant creak of something at the livery, the particular quiet of a small town an hour after dark. She thought about Emmett Cole's mother, who had left that window cracked to hear the street. She thought about Emmett Cole standing outside it, hat in his hands, 15 years of grief in the set of his shoulders. She thought about May asking why he looked sad when he looked at the shop, and about the way he had answered that question honestly, not deflecting, not performing, just choosing the right word and saying it. She thought about Edith Vance saying he has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you in all the years I have known him. And she thought about her own face, which apparently had a specific expression it made when she was thinking about something she did not want to be thinking about, and which had been made specifically visible to May on the subject of Emmett Cole. Outside, the October night moved across the New Mexico territory like a dark tide, bringing the cold and the stars and the particular smell of autumn that meant another season turning, another year, getting older, another version of herself, standing in the same shop with flour on her hands, making choices she had not expected to make. The window was still cracked. She left it that way. There was something she needed to know, though, something that had been waiting in the spaces between conversations for a month, patient as rock. She needed to know why Emmett Cole had left Redstone Flats 15 years ago. Not because it would change anything, but because she was who she was, a woman who read every document before she responded to it, and she had decided that she was not going to let her heart get further into this situation without knowing all the relevant facts. She would ask him. Not yet, but soon. The asking came sooner than she expected, and in worse circumstances than she had planned. It began on a Wednesday, a bread day, when Emmett arrived at the shop to find Nora and May both in the front room, May doing her schoolwork at the counter, and Nora needing the last batch of the morning. Normal enough. Emmett came in, tipped his hat, and was reaching for the first crate when he stopped. He was looking at the back of the shop, not at anything in particular, just at the interior, the low doorway to the back rooms, the way the light fell, through the narrow corridor toward May's window. Emmett, Nora said. She only used his given name now, without quite noticing when that had started. The crates are on the left counter. I know. He did not move. Nora, I need to tell you something. May looked up from her schoolbook with the focused attention of a child who recognized the register of an important conversation. Then, demonstrating wisdom beyond her 9 years, she picked up her book and moved with apparent casualness toward the back room. Studying, she announced to no one in particular. Nora waited. Emmett turned away from the doorway and looked at the counter. Then he looked at her with the kind of directness she had come to know as his version of preparation, the way he steadied himself before saying something that cost something. The reason I left, he said, you don't have to, I do. He pulled off his hat, set it on the counter. I've been meaning to tell you for 2 weeks, and I keep finding reasons not to, and the reasons I'm finding are not good ones. They're the kind of reasons that look like self-protection and feel like honesty, but are actually just delay. She waited. My mother was sick for a long time before she died, he said. Not the way I told it, not a fast fever. She was sick for most of my last 2 years here. She needed medicine that cost money we didn't have in any reliable way. I was doing ranch work, odd jobs, whatever I could find. It wasn't enough. He paused. Arthur Vance knew about it. He offered to help, offered the money as a gift, not a loan. My mother refused. She was like you, actually. She had a particular relationship with accepting help that she hadn't earned. Nora felt the comparison land in her chest, but said nothing. Arthur helped anyway, quietly, through the doctor, making sure the medicine kept coming without my mother knowing where the money came from. He was looking at the counter now, at his hat lying there, at the flour-dusted wood around it. When she died, I found out. I found out that Arthur had been paying for her care for 1.5 years, had been paying for the roof we lived under, had been paying for most of what I thought I was paying for myself. He stopped. What did you do? I left. He said it without softening it. I told myself I left because I couldn't live in a place that held so much grief, and that was partly true. But mostly I left because I was ashamed. Because I had been 19 years old and proud and certain I was managing, and I hadn't been. And Arthur had known, and he had said nothing and helped anyway. He looked up. I spent 15 years being angry at him for that. Nora was quiet for a moment. And when he left you the ranch, I thought he paused, choosing carefully. I thought it was pity extended across time. One last way to take care of the boy who had never managed to take care of himself. He picked up his hat, turned it in his hands. I was angry when I got here. At him and at myself and at the whole situation. And now, he set the hat down again. Now I think he was trying to give me a second chance at something I ran away from. The first time I saw this building, your building, I thought I would feel the same grief I had carried for 15 years. And I did feel it. But I also felt something else. He looked at her. I felt like something in the building wasn't only grief, like something in it was still alive. He meant May, she thought. He meant her daughter's things in the room. The drawings, the smudged handprint, the braided rug. You could have told me this weeks ago, she said, gently but directly. I know. Instead, you've been making your peace with the building without telling me what the building meant to you. While I've been living in it and working in it and she stopped. I know, he met her eyes. I should have told you the first week. Yes, I was afraid. Of what? That you would feel, he paused, that you would feel I had some claim on the building that competed with yours. That I was only here for what the building held, not for... He stopped again. The unfinished sentence sat between them with its own specific weight. Not for what, Nora said. He looked at her steadily. Not for you. The word fell into the quiet of the shop like a stone dropped in deep water. Not loud, just the sound of it, and then the ripples. Nora breathed. This was the moment she had been avoiding for a month. Not deliberately, she had not been running from this in the way people ran from things they feared. She had been running from it the way you ran from things you wanted very much and were not sure you had the right to want. Daniel had been gone 4 years. 4 years was a long time, and also in the particular mathematics of grief, not very long at all. She had loved him. She still loved the memory of him, the careful-handed, careful-worded man who had painted her sign and kept her accounts and fallen in love with this territory and this shop and her and their daughter in that order. She would love him until she died. But she was alive. And this man in her shop was alive. And May, who was 9 years old and perceptive in ways that occasionally bordered on unsettling, had noticed the look on her mother's face. Emmett, she said, yes, I need to ask you something directly. All right, what do you want from this? She gestured not at the shop, not at the building, but at the air between them, which was where the real question lived. Not the ranch, not the arrangement. What do you want from being here, from having dinner in my kitchen, from knowing May's horse opinions, and listening to my accounts of difficult customers? And she ran out of words and made a different gesture, which meant all of it. He was quiet for long enough that she started to wish she had not asked. Then, I want the bread deliveries to keep going because I like coming here for them. I want to hear what May has to say about horses and philosophy and Tommy Ferris's latest offenses. I want to help you sort out what Hargrove is doing with Arthur's accounts. He paused. And I want to sit on the porch with you on evenings when the light is that particular color it gets in October and have nothing in particular to say and find that the nothing in particular is sufficient. Nora looked at him. That's very specific, she said. I'm a specific kind of person. She almost smiled, almost. She was not quite ready yet for everything that came with the almost. I'm still figuring some things out, she said. I know. He picked up his hat. I'm not asking you to finish figuring them out today. She walked him to the wagon. Cal was loading the last of the crates with the practiced efficiency of someone who had discovered that if he was quick enough, he got 5 minutes of horse conversation with May before leaving. At the wagon step, Emmett paused. About the building, he said. What about it? I've been thinking about it, about what I want to do with it. He kept his voice carefully level, and she noticed the carefulness, the same carefulness that Daniel had had, the way careful people telegraph that something was coming. I want to buy it, the building itself, separately from the land. Buy it outright and have it in my name as its own thing. Nora felt the shift before she understood it. You want to buy the building? The room where my mother lived, he said. I want it to be mine and properly deeded mine, not incidentally mine, because Arthur left it with everything else. I want to be responsible for it. He paused. I'd keep you as tenant with better terms than you have now. I'd never change anything about the way you use it, or the sign over the door, or anything that matters to your work. She was very still. But I would own the room. Yes, he looked at her steadily. I should have told you this weeks ago, too. Nora thought about the room, the braided rug, May's drawings, the smudged handprint on the window frame that she had left because it was from when May was very small. The window that she left cracked at night, now following a habit that was not hers but had become hers. She thought about Daniel's handwriting above the door, about the oven she had saved 2 years to buy, about 4 years of early mornings and the smell of survival and the mathematics of necessity. She thought about the fact that Emmett had not told her this until now. "You've been planning this for weeks," she said, "and you've been making your peace with the building while I've been in it. While I've been, She stopped, and what she stopped on was not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The particular feeling of having trusted a situation and discovered it was more complicated than you had known. "Nora, I need you to go," she said, not loudly, not harshly, in the same quiet tone she used for things that were absolutely certain. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read. Then he picked up the hat he had set down, put it on, and walked to the wagon. He did not look back. Nora stood in her doorway and watched the wagon turn the corner and disappear, and felt the complicated weight of being a person who had decided too quickly to trust something and had not been wrong exactly, but had perhaps been less than fully right. Inside, May appeared from the back room. "He's gone," she said. "He's gone." May looked at her mother with the clear eyes of a child who had understood more of the conversation than she was supposed to. Then she came and pressed her face against Nora's arm and said nothing. They stood in the doorway together for a while. "I don't like when things are complicated," May said finally. "I know," Nora said. "Me neither. But you always figure them out. Eventually." "Good." May straightened up and went back inside with the practicality of a person who had delivered a necessary comfort and had schoolwork waiting. "I'm hungry." Nora followed her in. She cut May a slice of bread and sat across from her at the counter while May ate, and the shop was warm and smelled of the morning's work, and outside the October afternoon moved over redstone flats with its particular copper-colored light. She needed to think. But what she mostly felt sitting there with her daughter in the quiet warmth of the shop was that she had not been wrong about him. He had not been wrong about her. They had simply both been incomplete, two people circling the same truth from different directions, each carrying pieces that the other did not yet have. That was not betrayal. That was just the wrong order. And she was beginning to understand slowly the way things that arrived in the wrong order could still arrive right. 3 days passed. Emmett did not come on Friday, which was a bread day. He sent Cal with the wagon and a note that said, "Only I understand. Take whatever time you need." The bread was excellent, as always. Nora read the note twice, set it on the counter, and served the morning's customers. May did not mention his absence. This was the most telling thing about it, because May mentioned everything. On Saturday evening, Iris Valdez knocked on the back door of the bakery. Nora knew Iris slightly. She had come into the shop perhaps 3 times, always briefly, always with the particular manner of someone doing something that was not quite sanctioned by whoever she reported to. She was young, perhaps 20, with dark eyes and the specific quality of stillness that people developed when they spent their days in houses where the wrong word in the wrong moment had consequences. She was the Hargroves' housekeeper. "Can I come in?" she said. Her voice was low. Nora stepped back and let her in. Iris looked around the back room at May sleeping in her room. The door pulled most of the way, closed the braided rug visible through the gap, and then at Nora with the expression of someone who had spent a long time deciding something and had finally decided. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about Mr. Hargrove, about what he's doing." Nora sat across from her and listened. What Iris said took 20 minutes and changed the shape of everything. Warren Hargrove had not merely forged a transfer clause on a loan document. That, it turned out, was the smallest of what he had done. Over the 7 years since Arthur Vance had signed his first financial agreement with Hargrove Bank, an agreement made as Arthur had told Edith, in good faith, on both sides, Warren had systematically altered the terms of that agreement. Small changes at first, extra fees buried in the language, revised interest rates that Arthur had never been told were revisable, a secondary lien on part of the Vance land that Arthur had believed was a formality and Warren had treated as real collateral. Arthur had discovered it 2 years before he died. Edith had found the correspondence in his files after his death and had not known what she was looking at. Emmett, coming in as new co-owner, had inherited documents he had not yet had reason to examine closely. But Warren knew that an examiner from Santa Fe, the one Emmett had threatened him with, would find all of it. Every altered document, every forged signature, every quiet agreement that had never been agreed to. "How do you know this?" Nora asked. "Because Mr. Hargrove keeps everything in writing," Iris said. "He's very organized. He has files in his study at home, in a cabinet he keeps locked, and he has duplicates at the bank. Last month, before Mr. Cole's threat, he started moving the home files." She paused. "I move things in that house all day long. I see what goes where. Can you get to those files?" Iris looked at her steadily. "That's why I'm here." She reached into her coat pocket and set a folded paper on the table. "This is a list of what's in the cabinet. The dates, the names of the accounts, the numbers that don't match." She pushed it across the table. "I copied it last week. I've been carrying it ever since, trying to decide if I should." Nora looked at the paper, then she looked at Iris. "If Hargrove finds out you did this—" "I know." Iris met her eyes. "But my mother worked for people who did right by her, and she always said stand up for what's right even when it costs you something. It took me a long time to be ready." A pause. "I'm ready now." Nora picked up the list. The numbers on it were precise and damning. Warren Hargrove had been slowly absorbing Arthur Vance's financial position for 7 years, one invisible alteration at a time. And with Arthur dead and Emmett Cole newly arrived and uninformed, the plan had been to complete what remained to challenge the validity of Emmett's inheritance on the grounds of a technicality buried in the secondary lien to acquire the remainder of the Vance land through a foreclosure procedure that would look on paper perfectly legal. The forged loan transfer for Nora was a side element, a lever to use against Emmett if he asked too many questions. Get rid of the Baker woman, direct his attention elsewhere, give him a comfortable distraction in the form of Celeste Hargrove, and move quietly while he was occupied. It was elegant in the way that things designed by patient, careful people were elegant. It had been years in the planning. "There's one more thing," Iris said. "He's been speaking to someone. I don't know who he uses the telegraph, always at the bank, always late. But I've heard him mention a judge, one who owes him something." She paused. "I think he's trying to get ahead of the circuit court assizes. He wants this settled before the examiner arrives." "When is the examiner coming?" "3 weeks." Nora looked at the list, at the numbers, at Iris's careful handwriting and the courage it represented. "I need to show this to Emmett," she said. Iris nodded. "I know. That's why I brought it to you." She left through the back door quietly, the way she had come. Nora sat for a long time at the table with the paper in her hands and the lamplight moving, and May sleeping in the next room. Then she put on her coat and walked to the Vance ranch. But she did not make it. She was halfway to the ranch on the dark stretch of road between town and the first pasture gate when she heard hoofbeats coming fast from ahead of her far. Too fast and wrong in rhythm, a horse running hard without direction, the way horses ran when their rider was no longer guiding them. Nora stepped to the edge of the road. The horse came into the stretch of moonlight, and she recognized it immediately. A bay with a white star on his face, large and usually calm, now wild-eyed and lathered and running without purpose. Emmett's horse. "Whoa," she said, and held out her hand, and the horse slowed, because he recognized a voice that had been kind to him, because May had spent months teaching him that people with calm voices were safe. He slowed to a trot, then a walk, then stopped beside her, blowing hard. There was blood on the saddle. Nora's heart stopped. Then she took the horse's reins and turned back toward Redstone Flats at a run. She found help at the first lit window, Pete Skaggs at the livery, who was always late to bed, who took the horse and said he would send someone to the road. She ran to Della's house, which was closer than the ranch, and Della was awake in 30 seconds and dressed in 40. "Get the doctor," Nora said. "Tell him gunshot wound. I don't know how bad. Tell him Emmett Cole." Della was already pulling on her boots. Nora went back to the road. She found him a quarter-mile east of where the horse had been, on the ground at the side of the road, sitting up against the fence post with the particular deliberate stillness of a man managing pain by not moving. His left shoulder was dark with blood. He was conscious. "Nora," he said, with a steadiness that she found simultaneously reassuring and infuriating, Don't, she said, dropping to her knees beside him, don't tell me it's fine. I wasn't going to, it's not fine, he breathed. But I'm alive. She had nothing to work with but her coat and the clean hem of her skirt, which she tore with the practical efficiency of a woman who had made harder decisions than ruining a skirt. She pressed the cloth to his shoulder and kept pressure. What happened? Came from the tree line, south side near the Hargrove property line. His voice was measured, each word placed carefully. One shot, they weren't trying to miss. Who was coming with you tonight? No one. I was coming to see you. He looked at her in the moonlight. I was going to apologize. Again, more thoroughly. You can apologize when you are not bleeding. Fair. She held the pressure. The doctor arrived 20 minutes later with Della and Pete, and after that, things moved in the way they moved when competent people were dealing with a crisis with purpose and efficiency and without unnecessary conversation. Emmett was taken to the ranch. The bullet had gone through the shoulder cleanly, which the doctor said was the best possible version of the worst possible thing. He would need rest and careful watching for infection, but he was not in danger of dying tonight. Nora stayed. She stayed because she had not asked anyone's permission to stay, and no one had told her to leave, which she took as reasonable grounds. She sat in the chair beside the bed where they had laid him and held his hand while the doctor worked and felt his fingers tighten around hers when the instruments went deep and did not look away. Edith stood in the doorway and watched this without saying anything. Her expression was the expression of someone who had known something for a long time and was watching it arrive. When the doctor was finished and Emmett was sleeping, genuinely sleeping, not the restless fever sleep she had feared, Nora sat in the chair and did not move. Edith brought her tea. You should sleep, Edith said. Later, Edith sat in the other chair. They were quiet together for a while, two women in a room where someone they loved was sleeping off a wound, which was a particular kind of vigil that did not require much conversation. He told you about his mother, Edith said. Not a question. Yes. In the building. Yes. He was afraid to tell you. Edith sipped her tea. Not because he was dishonest, because he was not sure he deserved to want what he wanted. Nora looked at Emmett's sleeping face, the hard-cut jaw relaxed now, the creek water eyes closed, the strong hands still. He looked younger when he was asleep. Less like a man who had spent 20 years carrying things alone. He deserves it, she said. I know, Edith said. I'm glad you know it too. In the morning, Emmett opened his eyes to find Nora asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head tilted against the chair back, one hand still resting near his on the blanket. She had not quite let go of him, even in sleep. He lay very still for a long time, looking at the ceiling, feeling the ache of the wound and the warmth of the room and the specific quality of a morning that had something it had not had yesterday. Then May's voice came from the doorway. Is he awake? He turned his head. May was standing in the doorway in her school dress. Della must have brought her with the apple she had apparently brought for his horse, now clearly repurposed as a visiting gift. I'm awake, he said. May came in and sat on the edge of the chair her mother was not quite occupying and looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze he had come to know as her standard operating procedure. Does it hurt? She said. Some. Mama cried last night. I heard her when she thought I was asleep. He looked at Nora sleeping. I know, he said. She doesn't cry in front of people, May said. She cries when she thinks no one's watching. She paused. That means it mattered a lot. I know, he said again. May considered this. Then she held out the apple. Thunder will want this later, she said, but you can hold it for him. He took the apple. May, he said. Yes. I'm going to ask your mother something important when she wakes up. I wanted to ask you first. May looked at him with the gravity of a person who had been waiting for this question for some time and had already prepared her answer. My terms are riding lessons by spring, naming rights on any new horses, and you have to come to my school reading recital in December because Mama always comes alone and she should have someone to sit with. He looked at her. That's it. For now. May's expression suggested the list was subject to revision. There's also the issue of long division, but that's more of an ongoing situation than a term. I'll help with long division. You know long division. I've run a cattle ranch. I know a great deal of practical mathematics. May appeared to find this satisfactory. She stood up, patted his arm with the brisk gentleness of someone who had decided the business was concluded, and went to find Edith about breakfast. Nora woke 20 minutes later, blinked at the ceiling, then at him. "You're awake," she said. "I've been awake for a while." He paused. "I spoke with May." She looked at him, then at the apple in his hand, then back at him. "She negotiated," so he said. "Of course she did." Nora straightened in the chair. Her hair was coming down from whatever it had been in when she arrived last night, and she had been sleeping in yesterday's clothes, and there was a small crease on her cheek from the chair back, and she looked exactly like someone who had spent the night at a person's bedside because they could not have done anything else. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for the building conversation, for not telling you sooner, for making decisions about something that mattered to both of us without including you in them. You also got shot. Unrelated. Is it?" She looked at him steadily. "Someone shot you because they wanted to silence what you're doing with the ranch accounts, which you are doing partly because of me. I'm doing it because it's right," he said. "You happen to make me look at it, which is different." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the building, about the deed, about all of it. And I've decided something." He waited. "I've decided," Nora said, "that the things that are worth keeping in this life are worth keeping properly, with the right paperwork." A pause. "Both our names," he looked at her. "Is that a yes?" "It is." She met his eyes. "It's also, I want you to know, completely unrelated to the fact that you were shot last night. I had decided before the shooting. About 2 weeks ago." She stood up from the chair and smoothed her skirt and looked at him with a directness that he had come to understand was simply her native mode, not cold, not unkind, just clear. "I was waiting to say it until the Hargrove situation was settled so that it didn't look like gratitude." "It doesn't look like gratitude." "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." Outside the window, the November morning was doing what November mornings did in New Mexico: cold light, blue sky, the distant sound of cattle, and the ordinary work of a ranch coming awake. Inside the room was warm. "I should get back to the shop," Nora said. "I know. The morning batch doesn't bake itself." "No." She picked up her coat. At the door she paused. "When you're well enough to ride," she said, "come have dinner. May has conditions she wants to discuss with you directly." "She already gave me the list," he said. "She probably has supplementary items." Nora looked at him across the room with the morning light between them, and the whole of what they were doing still unfinished and ahead of them. "The school recital is in December." "I'll be there," he said. She went. He lay in the bed with the apple in his hand and listened to the sounds of the ranch and looked at the ceiling and felt in the careful provisional way that people felt things when they had been hurt and were being careful not to move too fast, something that he had not felt in 20 years. He felt at home. It was a cold night. October had fully arrived, and the stars were the kind you only got at this altitude: dense, indifferent, brilliant. The 3-mile road felt longer than usual, not because she was afraid, but because she had a great deal to think through on the way, and the cold air was good for thinking. She knocked at the ranch house door. It was Emmett who answered. He was in his shirt sleeves, which told her he had been working late at the desk. She had learned that about him, the way he rolled his sleeves when he worked. He looked at her with the particular expression of someone who had been thinking about something and has a thing walk through his door. He stepped aside to let her in without speaking. She laid the list on the table and told him what Iris had told her. He read the list. He read it twice. His face went through several things: shock, then a cold and focused anger, then something harder and more deliberate than either. Then he looked up. "She needs to be somewhere safe," he said. "Tonight. He'll notice the files are accessed. She has a cousin in Las Cruces. I told her to go." "Good." He looked at the list again. "This and the documents Edith has and a financial examiner." He paused. "This is enough. This is more than enough." He looked at her. "Nora." "Yes. I'm sorry for not telling you about the building, for making decisions about it without—" "I know." She sat down at the table across from him. "I was angry for a few days. And then I thought about it and realized that what you were doing, holding something private, well, you figured out how to say it, was something I have done many times about many things, including this." She gestured at the list. I should have come to you the day Celeste Hargrove walked into my shop and said something pointed about records. He looked at her. We've both been holding things, she said. Yes. We should probably stop. Yes. A pause. Starting with what? Starting with the building. She met his eyes. Tell me what you actually want to do with it. All of it. The room, the deed, the arrangement. Tell me what you have been thinking for the past month. He was quiet for a moment. I want to hold the deed to the building, he said. Not because I want to own it in the way that takes it from you, but because I need something that connects me to this place in a concrete way. Not just the ranch, not just the inheritance. Something mine that I chose that I came back for. He paused. But I don't want you to leave it. I don't want to change anything about the way you use it or the way it runs. He paused again longer this time. I want your name on the deed too. Nora looked at him. Both our names, he said. If you're willing, your right to the building and mine, well, equal. She understood what he was saying. It was not the same as a proposal. It was more specific than that. It was an offer of partnership, of shared claim, of two people deciding that what they had was worth making official in the way that mattered most to each of them. She who needed to know that her home was secure and her business was hers. He who needed to know that the place where his grief had lived could hold something living. That's a significant offer, she said. It's meant to be. I'll think about it. She paused. But I don't think I'll be thinking about it for very long. He looked at her with those creek water eyes in the lamplight of his kitchen, and she looked back, and somewhere in the middle of that look, something that had been working its way toward the surface for a month finally arrived. Then she remembered the list on the table. First things first, she said. He almost smiled. First things first. Emmett recovered in 9 days, which was faster than the doctor recommended, and exactly as fast as a man would recover who had no patience for lying still, and a ranch to run, and a case to build against one of the most powerful men in the territory. On the 3rd day, he was sitting up at the desk. On the 6th, he was walking the porch. On the 9th, he was in Redstone Flats. Nora saw him through the bakery window first, walking along the boardwalk with the deliberate pace of someone whose shoulders still made sharp movement, inadvisable in his coat, with his hat straight, looking like himself again. Cal was beside him carrying a folio of papers. She had the door open before he reached it. You're supposed to be resting, she said. I am resting. I'm walking slowly and not lifting anything heavier than a document. He looked at her. You have flour in your hair. I'm working. She stepped back to let him in. Cal, the coffee is on the back burner. Cal disappeared with the gratitude of a young man who was glad of an excuse to be elsewhere. Emmett sat on the stool behind the counter with the careful movement of a man accounting for a healing shoulder. He set the folio on the counter. I spoke with the circuit court office yesterday, he said. Judge Montoya's examiner is coming early. In Warren's rifle, the cartridge they found near the tree line matches a rifle registered to a man named Cade, who has done work for the Hargroves before. He was matter-of-fact about it. There will be charges. Are you afraid? Nora asked. No. You should be at least a little. Probably. He almost smiled. I'll work on it. She pushed a piece of bread across the counter to him. He took it without ceremony and ate it with the straightforward appreciation of a man who had been living on ranch cook food for 9 days and had missed decent bread considerably. He assumed that what I had here was something I could be redirected away from, Emmett said. Warren, he thought it hadn't taken root yet. She waited. It had taken root the first week I was here, he said. Before the bread arrangement, before any of it, when you stood in this shop and told me the truth of what my carelessness had cost you. He looked at her. I was not going to be redirected. Nora looked at him across the counter. The morning light was doing what October light did, turning everything gold and slightly insufficient, like the sun was trying its best. Her hands were flour-dusted, and she had been awake since 4, and there was bread in the oven, and absolutely nothing about this moment was the way she had imagined. It was better. I know, she said. He nodded once. The way he nodded when something had been received properly. First things first, he said. First things first, she agreed. In the morning before the shop opened, Nora sent Della to Iris's cousin's house to confirm she had arrived safely. She had. She had left in the night with a B in her mother's Bible, in the particular look Della reported of someone who had done something terrifying and found it lighter than expected. Emmett sent a telegraph to the circuit judge, not the one in Warren Hargrove's pocket, but the superior circuit judge in Santa Fe, a woman named Teresa Montoya who had the reputation of a person who found corruption deeply boring and dealt with it efficiently. He included Iris's list and a summary of Edith's documents and a request for immediate review. The reply came within 24 hours. The examiner would arrive in 2 weeks, not 3. Judge Montoya was interested. Warren Hargrove walked into the bakery 2 days later. He was not as composed as the first time. His suit was still good, but there was something slightly displaced about him, a man who had sensed that the ground was shifting and had not yet located exactly where. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I wonder if we might—" "No." "Oh," Nora said. He blinked. "You have a list of my shop's contents in your pocket," she said. "You've been waiting for a moment when the balance of things looked favorable." She held his gaze. "It's not going to look favorable again, Mr. Hargrove. Judge Montoya arrives in 12 days. Emmett Cole's legal representative in Santa Fe has copies of all of Edith Vance's documents. And the woman who kept your house for 3 years is somewhere you won't find her." The color in his face shifted. "Your loan against me is withdrawn," she continued. "I believe that was formally confirmed last week, which means you have no business in my shop and no standing in my building. So I am going to ask you to leave for the last time and suggest that the next several weeks of your life are probably better spent preparing for conversations with the circuit court than standing here." Warren Hargrove left without a word. Nora went back to her bread. The case moved with the efficiency that came from a judge who disliked inefficiency and evidence that was, as Edith put it, comprehensive to the point of generosity. The examiner from Santa Fe arrived, reviewed the documents, interviewed Emmett and Edith, and in a formal deposition taken in Albuquerque, Iris Valdez. On a Tuesday in late November, the circuit court issued its findings. Warren Hargrove was charged with document fraud, financial misconduct, and breach of fiduciary duty across 17 separate accounts over 7 years. The charges were detailed and precise and left very little room for the particular kind of argument that assumed a judge had not read carefully. Celeste Hargrove was not charged, there being no evidence of her direct involvement in the financial crimes. But the investigation had made clear enough what her role in the diversion strategy had been, and Redstone Flats being the size it was, that clarity was its own consequence. On the day the findings were published, Nora was in her shop when Della walked in with the look of someone delivering news so satisfying it required deliberate restraint. "It's done," Della said. "Official." Nora set down the bread knife, breathed. "It's done," she agreed. That evening, Emmett came to the bakery, not for bread, not for anything in particular. He came and sat at the counter while Nora cleaned up, and May told him in detail about the injustice of being expected to learn long division when she was clearly already using mathematics in ways that were practically applicable. He listened to all of it with the specific expression of a man who finds something very pleasant and has no intention of interrupting it. When May had run out of opinions and gone to bed, the shop was quiet and warm and smelled of the day's baking. "I found something," Emmett said. He reached into his coat and set a folded letter on the counter. Old paper yellowed at the folds, the handwriting, in a deliberate script that had the quality of someone who wrote rarely and therefore carefully when they did. Nora looked at it. "Arthur left it in a box with his personal papers," Emmett said. "Edith found it when she was sorting through things last month. She gave it to me last week." "What is it?" "A letter he wrote to me. Not mailed, he kept it." He paused. "I think he wrote it years ago and kept adding to it when he thought of things. The last entry is dated 2 months before he died." Nora looked at him. He nodded slightly, and she picked up the letter. It was dated in 3 distinct hands, the same handwriting at different ages. The first entry was from 15 years ago, Emmett. "If you come back, and I believe you will, you'll find the building on the east side of Commerce Street has been taken on by a family from Las Cruces. The widow is a baker. She keeps the place better than anyone I have seen keep a building in this territory. I thought you should know the room is in good hands." A second entry 2 years later, "The baker's husband has died. She stays on." There is something admirable about the particular way she refuses to be defeated by things you would recognize it, I think. And at the bottom, in a shakier but still careful hand, "I have thought a great deal about what to leave you and why. The ranch, you know. But the building on Commerce Street, that is for you to make the decision about. The woman who uses it has been doing right by it for 4 years. She does not need a new landlord any more than she needs to be told what to do. But I think if you come back and are honest with yourself, you will find that the building matters to both of you for reasons that cannot be put in a deed. I suspect you will figure the rest out. You always did once you stopped running. Nora set the letter down. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the counter, at the flour, the bread knife, the worn wood Daniels sign above the door. This room that had been someone else's grief and had become her livelihood in May's childhood, and now apparently something more than either of those things. He knew, she said. He knew the things he bothered to pay attention to, Emmett said, which was most things. She looked at him. The lamplight was warm on the flour-dusted surfaces, and May was sleeping, and outside the November night was cold and still, and she had been fighting for this shop and this life for 4 years with everything she had. She did not feel tired anymore. About the deed, she said. He looked at her. Yes, she said. Both our names, a pause. You're sure? I've been sure for about 2 weeks. She almost smiled. I was waiting until this was finished to say it so that it didn't look like gratitude. It doesn't look like gratitude. Good. She picked up the letter carefully and folded it back along its original creases and held it out to him. He should have sent this. He probably knew I needed to find it, not receive it. Emmett took the letter, looked at it, then looked at her. I don't know how to do this correctly, he said. I am aware that the correct way to do this involves a ring and a proper occasion and asking your daughter's permission in advance. May is 9 years old and will be awake in 7 hours. Then I'll ask her in the morning, he paused. Will she say yes? Nora thought about May's clear eyes and her direct questions and the look on her face when she had said, he has kind eyes, the horse eyes, but also Mr. Cole with the certainty of someone stating a fact they had verified. She's going to want to negotiate the terms, Nora said. He almost laughed. Almost it was the near laugh she had grown to watch for the one that was better than most people's full ones. What kind of terms? Riding lessons, I expect. Regular carrot access. Possibly some structural role in naming any future livestock. Those are reasonable terms. She's a reasonable person. Nora looked at him across the counter, across the 4 years and the flour and the wrong order grief, and everything that had arrived sideways while she was paying attention to something else. So are you. He held her gaze. You called me a thoughtless brute the first day we met, he said. I was accurate at the time. You were. That almost smile fully arrived. I have spent considerable effort since then trying to be less of one. It shows, she said. Outside November moved across Redstone Flats with its cold and its stars and the particular quality of a New Mexico night that went on forever in all directions. The fire in the oven ticked in the cooling. The shop held the warmth of the day's work as it always did, as it had for as long as it had been standing. In the back room, the side window was cracked open an inch, just enough to hear the street, just enough to let in the cold air and the sound of the ordinary world continuing. It had always been left that way. It would be left that way still. In the morning, May Hale came downstairs to find Emmett Cole at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and the patient expression of a man who had arrived early on purpose. Mr. Cole, she said. May. He set his hat on his knee. I have something I need to ask you. She looked at the tea at him at the hat with the clear-eyed assessment of a 9-year-old who had been paying attention for several months. Is it about Mama? She said. It is. May sat down. She folded her hands. She regarded him with the gravity the question deserved. I have conditions, she said. I expected you might, he said. I'm listening. Outside Redstone Flats woke to a cold November morning. The bakery sign above the door, Hale's Bread in Daniel's slightly uneven handwriting, turned from gray to gold as the sun came up over the eastern mesa. Inside a negotiation was taking place between a 9-year-old who wanted riding lessons and a man who had spent 20 years learning that the best things in life required careful listening, and both of them were taking it seriously. Nora came downstairs to find them at the table together. May had a list. Emmett was writing it down. Nora stood in the doorway for a moment and did not say anything. The morning light lay across the counter, and the flour and the warm air of a kitchen that had been lived in and loved in and fought for, and was still standing. Then she went to start the bread. Some things you did every morning because they needed doing, and some things you did every morning because they were the best part of what you had, and sometimes if you were lucky and stubborn and willing to believe in things that arrived in the wrong order, those two things were the same thing. The oven was warm, the dough was waiting, the day had begun. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. If this story moved you, if Nora's stubbornness felt familiar, if Emmett's long way home made you feel something, then please leave us a comment below. Tell us which moment hit you hardest. We love knowing where in the world these stories are being heard. If you are new here, welcome. We tell stories like this one every week. Subscribe so you never miss one, and hit the bell so the notification actually reaches you. Take care of yourselves. We will see you next time.